right now. Stories that cover the controversy of whitewashing continue to appear in the news and other media outlets, and as time passes, questions arise over the entire practice and validity of whitewashing. First, it's important to understand the definition of what whitewashing actually is. Whitewashing refers to casting white actors or white-identifying actors as characters who are either non-white or are of an indeterminate race. Although the term became more readily used in the 1990s, the practice has existed almost as long as cinema itself. One early and overt example is Al Johnson's character in 1927's The Jazz Singer. In it, Johnson uses blackface, a use of applying makeup to mimic an ethnicity, in one of the most infamous examples of an American minstrel act. I spoke to Dr. Kirsten Thompson to discuss more about what the other facets of whitewashing are.
It describes certain practices which have been around for longer than the term itself. That is, the casting practices of white characters, or white actors rather, to play characters of different ethnicities. And to my mind, it also encompasses a number of other related practices, aspects of cinematography that favor white skin or that assume a white normativity to a kind of default racial position, which is that of whiteness. A great deal of classical Hollywood cast actors who were playing non-white actors who were playing non-white roles. For example, Peter Lorre played Mr. Moto, which was a series, a detective, which was a Japanese detective. Werner Olland and a number of other actors played a character called Charlie Chan. There were many, many cases of blackface, brownface, or yellowface, that is, of white actors who would wear particular forms of makeup and play non-white characters or characters of color. These go back right to the very beginning of the coming of cinema in the United States. Notoriously, of course, Birth of a Nation was one such film which featured a character, a white actor in blackface playing an African-American soldier in a story about the Civil War, and which depicted African-Americans in offensive ways. Tilda Swinton, who plays, what's her character's name? The ancient one, I'm always forgetting, in Doctor Strange, which Margaret Cho, the stand-up comedian, of course, has brought a great deal of attention to in her recent shows that have been running, and an exchange of letters that she and Tilda had around this issue, the politics of casting a white woman, a white Scottish woman, in this particular role. Or Scarlett Johansson in Ghost in the Shell, which was an American remake of a classic anime film, and where Johansson plays a hybrid part human, part robotic creature, part cyborg, if you like, and where she's in this black wig and so on. I think that there are wider issues of which whitewashing is a very important part, namely that the industry itself, the Hollywood industry itself, is fundamentally a white and male organization. And this is borne out in the statistics. So, for example, according to the New York Times in 2012, 94% of Academy Oscar voters were white and 77% were male. Only 4% of those on film were Latinos, and only 5% were Asian American. And these obviously are quite different statistics from the demographics of these of both white and people of color. The Gina Davis Institute on Gender, which has been an important organization that the actress formed to draw attention to the inequity around gender casting, has noted that only 29.2% of all roles, speaking parts, are women. That means that overwhelmingly the roles that we're seeing on screen are, and lead it in terms of speaking parts and leading characters, are themselves male. And she has been leading a particular campaign to reverse these statistics. Well, actually, over the last 3-4 years, we had a series of controversies around the Oscars. In 2014 and 15, the Oscar So White campaign on social media drew attention to the fact that despite a number of very interesting films that were scripted, acted with leading African American writers and actors such as Creed, Straight Outta Compton, none of these films received nominations or received any awards. Last year, of course, we had the Best Picture being mistakenly given to La La Land and ultimately, correctly, being given to Moonlight. There was a campaign by the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences in light of all the controversies over race and the Academy's poor show at basically honoring people of color who were acting in films, to change their own membership, acknowledging that this is a problem, that this is an overwhelming organization which is overwhelmingly white and male. And so last year, an additional 1,500 people were invited to join the Academy who were both women and people of color. But even with that change in the membership, where the membership basically went up from about 6,000 to 8,000, and where a number of new actors and directors were invited in. Here, Taika Waititi, who's a New Zealander of Māori descent, is one such example, who joined the Academy last year. Cheryl Dunye, an African-American queer filmmaker, made Watermelon Woman, also joined the organization, the Academy. Even with those changes, the New York Times statistics have shown that 85 people of color and 395 women would need to join the organization each year for a number of years before the current Academy membership actually comes close to representing the demographics of women being 50% of the population and people of color, and the fact that the United States will be in future decades a majority non-white population. So there's a long way to go in terms of what the Hollywood industry has to do.
This leads us to another question. I spoke to Dr. Christina Roberts to discuss why this is happening.
There's so many mechanisms around whitewashing. The one that comes to mind immediately when I think about pushback and resistance to challenges of whitewashing are cultural appropriation, especially of indigenous regalia. You know, I'm thinking about the variety of different peoples and events where headdresses are included. You know, I'm thinking about Coachella. There's the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign's Chief Illiniwek controversy that has been going on, and that's a type of performance of indigeneity that is a whitewashing of the history. And a lot of the justification becomes, well, there's no harm, like this isn't something that's harmful. We're celebrating your traditions and your peoples and your history, and it isn't perceived of by those people as necessarily harmful because they're not experiencing that type of direct harm. If it was something that that there was unanimous agreement that it was something that was wrong and harmful, we wouldn't continue to see these patterns of whitewashing occurring. But since it is something that is inextricably tied to power, until there is an interrogation and a thorough examination of the ways in which power functions, and I'm thinking about post-colonial theory in literature and Frantz Fanon and colonial mimicry, and so many ways that you can see how power functions. Even the recent film Get Out, for example, and the function of the prison industrial complex in this nation and the ways in which that encourages people to want to maintain certain power dynamics. So I don't see, for example, in relation to whitewashing, I don't necessarily see it being only white identified people who are engaged in these harmful practices. I see it inextricably tied to capitalism in this country. I see it tied to politics in this country. I see it tied to the ways in which hero narratives are told, where the stories that we are constantly saturated with indicate to us that there will be this great white hero that will manifest and will save everybody from certain destruction or certain doom. All of those pieces are so tied together that it becomes a type of cultural momentum justification for the continued whitewashing. There's many examples. I could just go on and on and on. Everything from like Dances with Wolves with Kevin Costner, and you have, like I mentioned, Avatar. You can go back to some of the early westerns and see that happen a lot. You know, some of John Wayne's early films and saving people from the Apaches who were so dangerous, and it even comes all the way into the present. I think about World War Z with Brad Pitt. You know, it's like, really? How is that even possible? That, you know, out of all of the people all over, it just happens to be this one person who's able to save everybody in some fashion. But the enemy has changed. The narrative hasn't changed that much. At one point, you know, the enemy were Apaches, the savages on the plains, and then it's transformed, and now there's new enemies, which aliens at some point, you know, thinking about extraterrestrial aliens, and then zombies as being a safe way for people to project these ideas around savagery, animalistic behavior, a lot of the same rhetoric that was used to justify enslavement of peoples, genocide, colonization of lands. So even if the characters have shifted, the whitewashing narrative and this hero narrative it persists.
All right, so now we know about the what and the why, but what about the how? I discussed the how with Dr. Mary Antoinette Smith, who read an excerpt from a book called Unsettling America.
When Hollywood represents Americans, rarely are they the people of African, Latino, Latina, or Asian heritage who live in Watts. You know, Watts is in Los Angeles, California, but it actually could be representative of any urban area across the United States. We are invisible people in a city which thrived on glitter, big screens, and big names, but this glamour contained none of our names, none of our faces. The refrain, "This is not your country," echoed for a lifetime. Yet those who, because of their skin color, ethnicity, or religion, are labeled un-American, often most vigorously attempt to embody an illusory Americanness. When I Was Growing Up, Nellie Wong implies that the lesson of self-hatred is learned along with the mantras of Americanness. It's angering, and I don't like. I think whitewashing perceptions of it are very, very complex, because whether we know the terminology or not, we feel and recognize that we're not represented. And on some level, that's a form of whitewashing. There's a deliberate kind of whitewashing where roles are changed, or interchanged, or people who are not ethnically specific in terms of the roles that are being played. They're either replaced or someone of another ethnicity is put in the role. You know, it's rough out there, and it's predatory out there. And what people will do actually to have work or to have roles isn't based on morals. It's not based on moral fiber. It's not based on human respect for other human beings. It really is based on money and availability. And so there has to be kind of a total revolution of values, is what I think. And it has to be value of the human beings, and also who also is in the industry. It's kind of like with the Oscars, where we've been complaining about the fact that people of color tend not to get Academy Awards, but that can be based on the people who are voting, who tend not to be people of color. So they've been in dialogue and sort of advocacy for bringing more diversity into the Academy. For me, it's, kind of late in the game. It's 2017, and we're only now beginning to engage in this kind of inclusiveness. So I don't want to err on the side of despair, but on the other hand, I'm 60 years old, and I'm thinking there are certain things that I probably won't see in my lifetime. And I don't know how we can have that revolution. I don't know how we can have that revolution in in people's thinking and in terms of inclusivity.